Good morning, everyone. This is the case of the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys, Ms. Brady, Mr. King, Ms. Nelson, Ms. Higgs, and Ms. Spengler. And the prosecution is represented by Mr. Brockler, Mr. Orman, Ms. Pearson, Mr. Edson, and Ms. Tish McGuire. We are outside the presence of the jury. Yesterday, the prosecution asked to use a transcript of an audio taped interview that was conducted with the defendant in this case. I have had a chance to do some research, and as I had indicated, there is some case law on this, and I found the authority that I mentioned yesterday I thought existed. First, I found People versus Medina, 72 Pacific 3rd, 405. This is a Colorado Court of Appeals case from 2003. In this case, copies of a partial transcript were given to the jury to follow along with the video testimony, and the copies were then collected from the jury. I think I made reference of this type of procedure yesterday. I also found People versus Coca, C-O-C-A, 580 Pacific 2nd, 1258. This is a Colorado Court of Appeals case from 1978. In this case, the court said, contrary to the defendant's contention, the trial court did not err in admitting the transcript of the August 14 tape into evidence. Accurate transcriptions of sound recordings are admissible to assist the jury in following the recordings while they are being played. Here, the detective who monitored the recordings testified that the transcription had been prepared from his own handwritten transcript and that it was accurate. The defendant also contends that the admission of the transcript caused unfair repetition of the recording. However, since the alternative to providing a transcript is to play the tape numerous times in order to review thoroughly critical portions thereof, we do not consider such a procedure as unduly emphasizing the evidence. In People versus Al-Yosef, that's A-L-Y-O-S-I-F, 206 Pacific 3rd, 824, Colorado Court of Appeals case from 2006. The court said that courts have recognized the need to use transcripts of tape-recorded conversations to assist the jury where portions of a tape are inaudible. In this case, over the defendant's objection, the trial court admitted a videotaped interview of the defendant and the transcript of that interview after the interviewing detective testified that the transcript was a fair and accurate representation of the interview. Also, after a witness testified for the prosecution, the people offered into evidence his videotape interview and the transcript of that interview as prior inconsistent statements. The court noted that the transcripts were properly admitted into evidence. In People versus Hayder, it's H-A-I-D-E-R, 829 Pacific 2nd, 455, Colorado Court of Appeals case from 1991. The court said that courts have long recognized the need to use transcripts of tape-recorded conversations to assist the jury where portions of a tape are inaudible. If the parties do not stipulate to an official transcript, and official is in quotation marks, the judge may either make a pretrial determination of the accuracy of the transcript by comparing it to the tapes, or may permit the jury to examine both versions of the transcript so that it can determine which version is more accurate. We therefore conclude that the admission of the disputed transcripts here did not constitute error. The court then said that under the holding of United States versus Onori, O-N-O-R-I, 535 Federal 2nd, 938, 5th Circuit, 1976, to eliminate potential prejudice to the defendant, the trial court, if requested, should give a cautionary instruction informing the members of the jury that the transcript is to be considered as any other evidence which they can accept or reject based on their listening to the recording, and the jury should be told that it is the final arbiter of which version, if either, is accurate. The court then said, we adopt the reasoning in Onori as Colorado law and therefore conclude that if the accuracy of a transcript is disputed and one of the parties requests an instruction, the trial court must give the cautionary instruction. This method will assure the defendant's right to a fair trial with no prejudice to the people. So, Mr. Orman's request is granted, assuming that the detective testifies that the transcript that he's intending to use is accurate and that he himself has checked it. So with the proper foundation, I will allow the prosecution to admit the transcript into evidence. I asked the defense yesterday if it had a transcript, and he claimed that that was work product. I don't think it is attorney work product, but I'll give the defense another opportunity at this time to tell me whether it wants to submit a different transcript. Okay, if the defense wanted to submit a different transcript, I would do, so the record is clear, I would give the jury both, the transcript the prosecution is submitting and the transcript the defense is submitting. And then I would give the jury a cautionary instruction along the lines of the following. Members of the jury, because the parties disagree about some of the contents of the recording that are difficult to hear or understand, 2 transcripts have been submitted. These transcripts are to be considered as any other evidence. You are not required to accept either document as an accurate transcript of the recording. Rather, it is up to you to assess the accuracy of each transcript. After you listen to the recording and review each transcript, you are to determine which, if either transcript, accurately reflects the recording, including any parts that are difficult to hear or understand. You can accept an entire transcript, part of it, or none of it. You also can accept parts of both transcripts. You are the final arbiter of the contents of the recording. And of course, I would be open to suggestions from counsel in terms of modifications, additions, or deletions with respect to the proposed cautionary instruction that I just read. Given that the prosecution is the only party that's submitting a transcript, the cautionary instruction that I propose giving, unless the defense objects, is the following. Members of the jury, the transcript that has been submitted is to be considered as any other evidence. You are not required to accept this document as an accurate transcript of the recording. Rather, it is up to you to assess the accuracy of the transcript. After you listen to the recording and review the transcript, you can accept all of the transcript, part of the transcript, or none of the transcript. You are the final arbiter of the contents of the recording. So the question is, does the defense want me to give that instruction, or is the defense opposed to that instruction?
We're not opposed to that instruction. We'd ask that you give it.
All right. And what about the prosecution? Any position?
Your Honor, I have no objection to the instruction, although I'm not a big fan of using the word arbiter with jurors. It seems to be a hyper-technical word that lawyers understand, so I would use the word judge instead of arbiter, but I agree that's sort of nitpicking. I just don't like to use words jurors might not understand.
That came from the Onori case. I think it's the name of the case. I read that case itself. Yes, Onori. Does the defense have any objection to me changing arbiter and using judge instead?
No.
Okay. And so I will say you are the final judges of the contents of the recording, without objection from the parties. Are there any other revisions that either side is requesting with respect to this particular cautionary instruction?
I'm not, although I have a question, Your Honor.
Okay, what's the question?
One of the cases that Your Honor had referred to, which I read last night, talked about just giving it to the jury and not making it an exhibit. If we're talking about it in terms of evidence, it seems to me evidence means admitted exhibits. So my intention is to ask that it be admitted. I was just wondering if the court had a plan of me just giving it to the juror and taking it back.
If the people are moving to admit it into evidence, then I'm going to admit it, assuming the foundation is laid, the proper foundation is laid. And then we'll mark it as an exhibit. And then in terms of whether the transcript and the audio tape goes back to the jury room during deliberations, there's specific case law on that. And so I think we address that later. Just don't let me forget that we will not send that back to the jury room during deliberations until we've had a conversation about it, okay? So I read that Medina case because I had mentioned that particular procedure, and Colorado law seems to me recognizes both. The type of procedure where you give a transcript to the jury in court to follow along as the recording is played and then take the transcript back, and the procedure where the transcript itself is admitted into evidence. And since the prosecution is moving the transcript into evidence, and assuming the proper foundation is laid, I will allow it. And the Honori case, by the way, has a fairly lengthy discussion about why transcripts in this type of situation should not be treated as an aid, such as, for example, lighting being an aid to assist the jury in seeing things better in the courtroom, but rather should be treated as an exhibit, as evidence. And then given a cautionary instruction that, just like any other evidence, the jury has to decide what weight to give to it, and whether to accept it or reject it, or accept it in part and reject it in part. So, any other revisions, modifications, additions, or deletions with respect to the cautionary instruction that I read, Ms. Spengler? No? Yeah, it's hard to hear, especially when you speak, Ms. Spengler, you're soft-spoken. By the way, I want to thank Ms. Spengler for bringing this issue up yesterday. That was exactly the right way to handle it, and I very much appreciate her doing that. So I had asked the parties to do this, and she brought it up at the end of the day. That gave me time last night to research this, and so I very much appreciate her doing that. All right, let's bring the jury in. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Welcome back, members of the jury. How's everybody doing? Good, good. That was a hearty good. All right, thanks for coming back and again being on time. I appreciate that. The people may call their next witness, please.
Denise Axelrod.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Can I have you raise your right hand so I can administer an oath? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right, please be seated. Please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names.
Denise Axelrod, DeniseAxelrod.
Ms. Tisch-McGuire, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Morning.
Could you please tell the jury if you were at the Century 16 movie theater in Aurora, Colorado on July 19th of 2012?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
And did that go into the early morning hours of July 20th of 2012?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you please tell the jury about what you remember about the day of July 19th prior to going to the movie theater that day?
My husband and I had just recently gotten back from our honeymoon. I got up, I started some laundry. Our friend came over. We decided to go to Costco to get things to make a pot roast in our new crock pot. I started the pot roast. We watched all of the previous Batman movies. At some point during the day, we went to the theater to purchase our tickets. I don't remember who paid for them or how we got them. Went back to the house, had dinner, watched the final Batman movie before we drove to the theater. And
Could you tell the jury who your friend's name is that you spent the day with?
yes, ma'am, Joshua Nolan,
Could you spell that for the jury?
Joshua Nowlan, I believe.
Do you recall how you got to the theater that night?
Yes, ma'am, we drove separately. Josh took his vehicle, and my husband and I took our vehicle.
Do you know what time you got to the movie theater?
I want to say an hour, possibly 45 minutes before the movie started.
What happened when you got to the theater? Did you have to wait in line?
No, ma'am. We already had our tickets. We went to the concession. I believe Josh bought peanut M&Ms, and Brandon and I bought a large Coke. We went to the theater and proceeded to find our seats.
Do you recall what theater number you went into?
Not at the time. No, ma'am. I just went in.
Do you now know or believe what theater it was?
Yes, ma'am. It was
What
Theater 9.
Now, how did you go about the process of choosing your seats?
Well, there were still quite a few open, so we wanted the best seats. So we found some place in the middle that would accommodate the three of us.
What did you do while you were waiting for the movie to begin?
People watched other people come in, made fun of people. Just people watched, made jokes amongst ourselves.
At some point in time, did the movie begin?
Yes, ma'am, it did.
And do you recall if there were previews before the movie?
Yes, ma'am. The only one I remember was the one for Superman.
And after the previews, did Batman begin?
Yes, ma'am.
And at some point in time, did something happen during your movie?
Yes, ma'am. After the scene where Catwoman steals the pearls from Bruce Wayne's manor, you know when you shake up a soda can and you open it and it's that psh sound? I heard that sound and I saw something fly from the lower right of the theater to the upper left. There was a pop and smoke began to come out, and then I heard the first shot.
Now, when you said that you saw something go from the lower right to the other side of the theater, is that if you're facing the movie theater screen? So if that's the movie theater screen, is that what you saw?
Yes, ma'am.
So what did you do after you heard the first gunshot?
I didn't really do anything. My husband grabbed me firmly by the back of the neck and threw me to the ground, and he tried to cover me with his body. My head was roughly in between his knees, and he was covering the upper half of me. He told me, "Don't scream." So I tried to be quiet. I told him that I loved him because I didn't know if it would be the last time that I would be able to do so. There was just a lot of screaming. You can hear people running. You can hear the gunshots. I didn't really see anything at that point at the beginning. My husband was just covering me, telling me just to stay down and be quiet.
Now, could you tell the jury who your husband is?
Yes, ma'am. He's Brandon Axelrod, Brandon.
And Axelrod, same spelling as
Yes,
your name?
ma'am, sorry.
So you're down on the ground. You're hearing these things. What else happens next?
It sounded, from what I could determine, that the gunman was just walking back and forth in front of the screen, just spraying. I believe I said spray and pray. I'm sure not a ton of you have played video games, but it's where you just go in and try to shoot everything. From what I could hear, the trajectory was just going everywhere. I remember thinking, this sounds exactly like a war movie. I was obviously very frightened, but I didn't scream. I don't remember saying anything except "I love you" and "please make it stop." There was just so much screaming and so much gunfire. At some point it stopped. you started to hear people move again, and then it started. In that lull, I had peeked through the hole in between the seats, and then he started to fire again, and I saw the starburst flash from what I would assume is an assault rifle.
I'm going to stop you for a second. Can you describe for the jury what sort of hole area, if you could put your hands up?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
kind of describe what sort of area you're looking through.
Yes, ma'am. When you're at a movie and you're on the ground, there's like that much of a gap in between the seats, and I tried to just peek through that small gap just to see if I could see anything, and I saw nothing, and then I saw a starburst flash, and I immediately tried to hide again.
Could you tell where you saw that starburst flash from in the theater?
Off to the right, if I'm looking at the screen, it was kind of off to the right.
And how would you describe that flash?
So on an assault style rifle, when you have a starburst flash, the way the
At this point, I'm going to object. It's lack of foundation.
sustained to lack of foundation.
Ms. Axelrod, do you have any experience with firearms?
Yes, ma'am.
What is your experience with firearms?
Number one, I grew up in the South. I am a hunter. My dad taught me how to fire my first gun when I was 14. I've gone on many hunting trips, getting up at 3 a.m.
What sort of weapons do you have experience using?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Now, is what you heard in the theater that night consistent with gunfire?
Yes, ma'am.
And is what you believe to be a starburst flash something that you believe came from a firearm?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so go back to where you were telling us about after seeing the flash.
So I hid my face again, screaming, gunfire. I think the movie was still going. It was still dark. The lights didn't come on. There were no alarms. I couldn't tell you how long it was. At some point, I know that I was hit. I've never been shot before, so I couldn't tell you that, yes, I knew that it was a gunshot, but it felt like when you sit around a campfire and a log pops and that little bit of ash hits you, like in the arm or the leg, it's just something very hot and very fast. At that point, I tried to get lower on the ground. I don't remember exactly when in the series of events that happened. But the shooting continued, and then it stopped again, and it stopped. I'm so sorry. May I back up?
Sure.
Okay. At another point, I remember Josh screaming, and I look up, and his arm is resting on the seat, and the majority of it is gone. And then I believe he fell down, and it just all kept going. And then at some point, it did stop again. My husband told me to get up, and he took my shirt and wrapped it around Josh's arm. We tried to help Josh, but we couldn't. And then we got up, and he started to push me up the stairs. And I guess he saw the gunman on the other side. I'm not.
Judge calls for speculation.
Sustained. I wanted you pass, since this is Mr. King's witness, pass the microphone to him, please. The objection as to calling for speculation is sustained under Rule 602.
Thank you, Your Honor. So if you could just tell us about your observations.
Yes, ma'am.
And to clarify as well, is this person who pushed you up the stairs, is this your husband at this point in time?
Yes, ma'am. Brandon was pushing me up the stairs. Something happened. He spun me around and shoved me back down the stairs. What I remember most vividly is holding on to the railing as I was wearing slippers. And I remember looking at my hand, and it was just completely covered in blood. We got to the bottom of the stairs and had to step over a man. I don't know if he was dead, but we had to step over him. We turned to go back down the hallway, stepped over a magazine and shells, ammunition, and the walls were just smeared with so much blood. And we got out, and there were two officers. We raised our hands and said, "We're not armed," and they told us to go. We were told to go outside. We started grabbing firemen, police officers, anyone that we could, trying to tell them, "Our friend is still in there. There's still people in there. You have to help them." and we were told to go to the triage area. For some reason, some woman grabbed me, and Brandon told me I have to go help Josh. And some woman held me and said God wants him to go back in, and just made me really mad. And I said, to hell with you.
Judge, at
gonna-
this point, I'm going to object to the narrative nature of this response. There
Ms.
have to be
Axelrod.
questions in here.
All right.
I'm sorry.
The objection as to the narrative is sustained pursuant to Rule 611A.
So after you got outside the theater, what did you observe?
It was chaos. It was just the worst scene imaginable. People were screaming, people were crying, there was blood everywhere. There were officers and firemen just trying to grab a hold of the situation, doing everything that they could, and we were told to go to the triage center.
Let's talk about the triage center. So when you get to the triage center, what happens?
Well, my husband Brandon had pulled my pants down and said, "You're bleeding," because I said it hurt. We went over
What area of your body is this?
my right butt cheek.
And what did your husband notice?
Just that I was bleeding a lot. We had gone over to the triage center. Either a fireman or an EMT looked at it, said I needed to go to a hospital. They tried to take me by myself. I refused to go without my husband. There were other people sitting waiting for an ambulance. It was very bad.
Now, were you eventually transported to a hospital?
Yes, ma'am. My husband and I were taken to Aurora South, where it was an equally chaotic scene.
What happened when you got to Aurora South?
They put us in a back room, just the two of us. Eventually, we were both taken for x-rays and then taken back to the room.
Right? And what happened when you got back to the room?
Well, as I learned later, the hospital had mixed up my x-ray, and I was told that I was just grazed. So they gave us a Band-Aid, they gave my husband an ice pack, and they gave us, or myself, a prescription for Vicodin, and we were told we could just go.
At any point in time, did you return to the hospital?
Yes, ma'am. The following day, and they said it looked fine. They gave me another bandage, and we were able to go up and actually see Josh.
And were you able to observe Josh and Josh's injuries at that time?
Yes,
Objection
ma'am.
cumulative.
Sustained pursuant to Rule 403.
Now, at some point in time, did you learn that you had not just been grazed by a bullet?
Yes, ma'am. After 2 weeks, it was severely bruised, so I went to my primary care physician. She took one look at it, said no, there's something wrong. I got new x-rays and a new CT scan, found that there was a bullet lodged in my right butt cheek. 2 weeks later, I had an outpatient surgery procedure where it was cut out.
So how long after the shooting was it that this happened?
About a
Asked and answered.
I think she did answer that. I think she said a couple of weeks. But I'll let you clarify, so I'll overrule it.
Overall, it was about a month after the initial shooting.
Then how long of a recovery process was it for you?
Months.
Do you have any additional injuries today?
Other than emotional, no, ma'am.
Your Honor, if I may approach the witness.
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to hand the witness what's been marked as People's Exhibit 4514, 4515, 1108, and 4585.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Axelrod, if you could look at that first exhibit.